Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carroll, Massar and Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
We are once again starting with China today because for a third day we're looking at headlines over stimulus, got those overnight. It is, of course, the world's second largest economy. What happens in China tells us so much about what's going on in the global economy, China's growth trajectory being closely watched around the world. This is something Nobel laureate and economist Joseph Stiglitz singled out earlier today at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum.
Unfortunately, where a real challenge for the emerging markets and developing countries is going to be China, because we, and the bipartisan view is that China represents a risk.
Or a threat.
A threat. And, I think at this point, there's very little evidence of that.
That, of course, was Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum happening today. So talking about China, he often talks about what's going on around the world, but certainly emphasizing what's going on there.
Yeah, and I look, the question of a risk or a threat is an interesting dilemma to look at. In terms of the announcements that we had today from the Chinese central bank, cutting interest rates at one-year policy loans by 30 basis points. That's by the most on record in terms of a scale of a cut. This follows that package of stimulus that we had announced by the PBOC governor yesterday as well. This all with the backdrop of the questions continuing to be asked about whether or not China is going to meet that growth target of around 5% this year. Let's get into that. We've got Bloomberg News senior editor Chris Anstey with us from our Boston bureau. Chris, great to have you on. Just talk us through the announcements that we had today and how that fits into what we'd learned yesterday from the PBOC governor.
Well, the one-year loan rate was widely expected. This was a follow-through from the shock and awe, as it were, on Tuesday of announcements of a host of different interest rate cuts, a reduction in the bank's required reserve ratio, and other monetary policy initiatives. As you say, this was the biggest on-record reduction of this one-year policy rate. But I would also just focus on the magnitude there. That was 30 basis points. And the benchmark 7-day rate that was announced on Tuesday, that was cut by just 20 basis points. For those of us who are used to monitoring the Federal Reserve or ECB, and we talk about 50 or 75 being magnitudes of scale, 20 and 30 really doesn't sound like a whole lot.
Is that why I was looking at the NASDAQ Golden Dragon China Index, those Chinese names that trade in the United States, yesterday up more than 9%, today giving back about 2% in a market that's got a fair amount of no direction, if you will, but nonetheless giving back. So not as impressive as what we've seen, Chris, as of late in terms of doing something to change the narrative in China?
Well, I think our colleagues at Bloomberg Economics had a great way of framing it. They talked about this as a growth bump, but not an economy fix. So it's enough to move the needle maybe a little bit on GDP growth, but the bigger problems that China has, the property sector, very low consumer confidence levels that never recovered since the pandemic hit,
right.
And consumer spending that remains, very much, on a weak trend. You've got demographics, all of these kinds of things. This is not going to be addressed by a 20 or 30 basis point rate cut.
And yet, though, Chris, as you well know, it's not the only thing that's happened over a series of time, not just this past week, but over months and some would say over the last year or so. So what is the fix for China? Is it just going to be a series of many, many moves already done to come before we see China, maybe the growth story change? Or is it a case that China is a very large economy and moving the nut and fixing the real estate thing is something that may take much, much longer to change, or maybe not at all?
Yeah, all good questions, and questions that China watchers are all asking. there does seem to be a kind of a universality of expectation that there will be some sort of next step on the fiscal front, something to try to jolt consumer confidence, something more concerted perhaps to fix the property market, and we'll see if that eventuates. But you've got economists saying that the scale of response really needs to be very large. I mean, potentially in the trillions of dollars to really address the property market. And we've had no real sign yet that Xi Jinping and his lieutenants are prepared to endorse that big a fiscal stimulus.
Yeah, well, that's one of the really interesting questions, isn't it? About, every time that we talk about stimulus in China, it's that question of essentially, has there been a shift in position from Xi Jinping into what he's willing to do to stimulate the economy? I'm looking at a story here about one-off cash handouts being given to people in extreme poverty. That's a direct aid measure. It's not going to do anything to boost consumer spending on a macro level. But is that perhaps an indication of the reticence that now exists in China to try and put more money from the fiscal side in?
I think that's exactly right. And some important context to keep in mind here is that the parts of the economy that Xi Jinping particularly cares about, new energy vehicles, renewables, solar, wind, nuclear power generation, the defense industry, all of those are going gangbusters. In fact, the latest monthly data showed double-digit increases in areas of the economy, the new productive forces that Xi Jinping has said are the priority for his government. All of those are doing very well indeed. So it is not entirely clear that he's particularly concerned that retail sales are only growing, at a 2% plus year-on-year pace rather than the 9% we saw pre-pandemic.
I do also wonder a very different China going forward. When I see that they're going to do different initiatives or the rules seem to change, foreign investors have to be looking perhaps at China very differently going forward. And yet, I don't know that we've seen dramatic outflows from global companies or moving their operations elsewhere or their involvement elsewhere. But I do wonder, what are we seeing in terms of investment flows that we really think about China's role, at least in the global marketplace, as being something very, very different?
Well, direct investment into China has turned out to a net outflow in recent quarters. As you say, it's not a huge outflow. Some of this might be simply reflecting less in terms of retained profits being repatriated abroad. So it's not a wholesale kind of shunning of China. But at the same time, it is a shift in direction. And if you look at the recent announcements of troubles with China sales on the part of BMW, on the part of Mercedes, you look at the Calvin Klein maker running into problems with the Chinese authorities with regard to sourcing cotton from Xinjiang. China is a much less attractive place for a whole host of reasons than it was, even as few as 5 years ago.
As we say often, we're living in interesting times and changing times. Chris Anstey, thank you so much. So appreciate it.
Thank
Bloomberg
you.
News senior editor, Chris Anstey there. All right, now we want to get to a story that is getting a lot of attention on the Bloomberg today.
Yeah, look, this is a question about trust. Once upon a time, the story was a growing economy lifted everyone, the whole rising tide lifting all boats thing. These days, though, the rich only seem to be rising, and the percentage of Americans who told Gallup that they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in major companies has dropped from 30% in 1999 to 16% this year. Writing about the Republic of Distrust is Bloomberg Opinion senior columnist Beth Kowitt, who's here with us in studio. Beth, great to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
This is depressing.
This is depressing, but lay it out for us. Why do we need to trust companies?
I mean, I think that this is a huge problem, right? This is what if people don't trust business, if they don't trust companies, our economy basically can't run, it can't function. People need to believe that big institutions in general have their best interest at heart, and I think that we're seeing that's just not the case in business and a lot of other institutions as well.
Well, let's talk about this, because I do think that, you and I feel like, Stephen, over the last couple of days have been talking about this, but I do think we understand the pushback in politics where people feel like government doesn't represent them anymore. And that goes hand in hand where they feel like there is an economy and marketplace that doesn't include them anymore. And I feel like the idea of companies taking care of employees isn't maybe there anymore. Us, we work for a really great company. I'm going to lay it out, fully transparent. We say it all the time. But many people don't feel that way.
I think that's true. And, one of the questions I tried to answer is, why do people believe that? Why do they think that business has their best interest at heart? And I think what we really looked at was this sort of 25-year period after World War II when rising tides really did seem to lift all boats, right? Everybody prospered, obviously some more than others. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a perfect era. But the gap between the wealthiest Americans and the poorest actually closed. And for a number of factors at play there. But I think a lot of people look back to this period and want to return to it. And there's some question, is that even possible?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's even the prominent examples of scandals at companies, to think about everything that happened at Boeing this year, for example, that shifts how people think about a company. I mean, how important is this for companies to get the handle on as well?
I think it's huge. I really think it's huge. I mean, yeah, I point to some of those in the piece, right? Enron, financial crisis. There's just one after another where people not only feel like it means that they can't trust business, but that the rules don't apply fairly to everybody, that somehow, the wealthiest leave unscathed while it's sort of those at the bottom that bear the brunt of it.
What about things like productivity gains, technology helping us out, unions where workers maybe had more of a voice at the negotiating table, that we used to be an economy that actually made a lot of stuff here before we started outsourcing it. We've talked with the folks who talk about all the consulting companies said, hey, here's a better idea, outsource it, save costs. But workers have been penalized, I think, as a result here.
Absolutely. And I think, again, that sort of golden era, that 25-year period, unions were in their heyday. I think people coming back from the front, we had an influx of workers. There was a lot of demand for goods. We were making things here in this country, as you mentioned. Right. And I think that really, there was a very progressive tax code. So I think that there were all these factors at play. And, one historian I was talking to said, you can't ring that bell twice, right? Like it was just sort of this confluence of events that led to this era. And even people who weren't even alive during that time, I think do idolize that period, and it's affected the way we do think about how business and the economy should work.
It's interesting to think about the timeline over this as well, because when we look at the polling from Gallup on where trust in companies is, through good times and in bad, it's still been pretty weak over recent years. Like this, it's not a question of when the economy's doing badly, that's the moment when distrust spikes. This seems to be something that's lasting, kind of, as I say, through good times and bad. Yeah,
and I think part of this is people feel like there is this promise, right? I'm going to work hard, and that should mean that I can, buy a house, maybe send my kids to college, that the next generation should prosper more than mine did. And I think we're not seeing that. One of the things I looked at as well is CEO pay. And the ratio of CEO to worker compensation that gap has just increased exponentially. So there's also this sense of, why am I struggling so much when those at the very top just seem to be getting paid more.
It's really wild, and you put this in the story, and we used to cover the Business Roundtable. We would do broadcasts from there, but this whole idea of laying out a few years ago, we talked about it, all stakeholders matter. Yes, investors. Yes, customers.
Stakeholder capitalism.
Where is that? And I feel like we have constant conversations with executives at companies and say, our employees matter. I mean, they can't do it without them.
Right. And I think this is a little bit. I think there is this feeling of hypocrisy where we have seen a lot of companies retreat on some of these promises very quickly when under pressure from certain conservative groups, right? DEI, ESG. We've seen a real rollback there, and it makes people wonder: did you actually ever care about this, or was this simply good marketing?
But that's also, I think, such an interesting point, because companies moved into this space and started taking positions on issues they felt were important and they thought would drive customer loyalty.
Did a lot through the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd.
But is that gone now? Is that just not possible anymore?
I do think that companies are saying, okay, maybe maybe we went a little too far on this. Maybe we don't want to take. Maybe we don't want to take a position. I think that the hard thing is in this era we are so polarized. There is no such thing as a neutral position, right? If you take a position, someone's gonna feel like this is against my beliefs. But if you don't, you're also sort of taking a position. So it's a tricky line.
Beth, got to ask you because we're going to talk with a very senior exec at Cisco Systems coming up. What do you think we should be asking companies about this?
Yeah, if they are retreating, why? Why are we rolling back on some of these positions? But also, what do they hear from their workers? Are they feeling some of this erosion of
in the
trust?
war for talent, right? Is this going to be a key factor for that as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff. As we said, it's among the most read stories of the Bloomberg. Beth, thank you as always. Beth Kowitt, she's Bloomberg Opinion senior columnist, talking about the Republic of Distrust.
Yeah, you can find it on Bloomberg.com/opinion as well if you want to read the piece in full. Beth, great to have you with us in studio. Look, this is a question that I think comes through now. So many of the conversations, we were down at the Plaza yesterday talking to senior execs as well. It feeds into how people are perceiving companies too, and that's something that's means you're going to get questions asked on that as well.
Yeah, and important issues, but employees feeling taken care of. We talk increasingly too about pensions going away, right? People used to retire and they didn't have to worry about things, but that's not necessarily a given anymore by a lot of companies.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
You might recall it was just about a couple of weeks ago, Tim and I actually caught up with Accenture's global talent lead. We talked about AI's impact on workers and the workforce. On that, Accenture is part of a consortium along with Cisco Systems on a build out of the AI-Enabled Workforce in the Information and Communication Technology, or ICT space. And our next guest definitely has some thoughts on that. We're so delighted to have back with us in studio Fran Katsoudas. She's Executive Vice President, Chief People, Policy, and Purpose Officer over at Cisco Systems, as I said, here in studio. How are you?
Good. It's wonderful to be back.
It's great to have you here. A lot of things we want to get to. First up, I want to ask you, just as I often do, the macro business environment. How do you see things going right now?
So it's funny because I think there's so much going on in the world at the moment. But when we look at the macro business environment, what we see is a tremendous amount of focus still on technology. I think today the realization that we're hearing from our customers is that cybersecurity, AI can't wait. And so I think there's a lot of learning. I think there's growth. I think anytime you go into an election season, there's some hesitancy. And I will tell you, around the world this year, 60 elections, and there are countries where we see projects being held as people wait to see what happens in those countries. But generally
is that true in the
speaking,
U.S. in terms of the U.S. elections?
You know what? It's interesting. From a U.S. perspective, I don't see it as much, but I think part of that is because when you're talking about cybersecurity, when you're talking about the build out of infrastructure, it is pretty critical. I think some of the bigger projects that we're looking at around the world, you need to have a head of state and government that really believes and commits to the change. And so I think in those places, you are going to see a little bit of a pause as well.
Are those clients, are they willing to put money into this as well? Are they kind of up for spending to try and catch that innovation?
Yeah, it's funny. I see two things at the moment. So the first is I see around the world this belief that AI creates amazing opportunity. And so you have countries now around the world that are even creating AI ministers that are thinking about how do we capture the opportunity. And fortunately, I think a lot of them are also thinking about how do we ensure that we don't leave a subset of the community behind. And so I think that's a big part of the focus. I think many governments and companies are still sorting what does that build out need to look like? What are the use cases really that we'll be using over the next 12 months?
You mentioned communities feeling left behind, and we just talked about a Bloomberg story about how Americans' trust in big business went from bad to worse, and a lot of it has to do with workers feeling left behind. What are you hearing about that on your front? We've talked with you a lot about people issues, employee issues. This is your world. What do you hear back in terms of feedback from your workforce about what's important and maybe why they maybe feel behind? Not yours particular, but in general.
You know what? I think it's real. I think that anytime you see such significant changes in technology that will truly impact roles, I think it's natural for people to say, will I be relevant? What is changing? But it's funny, I think I would say around 18 months ago, it was a bit more negative. I think the delta is that today our employees are playing with the technology. They're experimenting. They're learning that in many cases the technology will make them better. I do think we have to admit that there's areas where jobs are going to go away. But
you
we
guys
also
are letting go a bunch of workers. You talked about it in your earnings report, and a lot of it said it wasn't financially related, right, or profitability related, but it was that you guys were having a strategy shift.
It was a mix of both.
Oh, was it?
It was a mix of both. And I think that it's important for us to always focus on growth, innovation, what we're going to need moving forward. And I think the commitment that we need to make to our people is that we're going to help them understand the changes that are coming and help them build the skills that they need. And it's funny, it ties to where you started, Carroll, but when we did that AI consortium body of work with Accenture and Google and Microsoft, IBM, what we found was that all of us collectively believe that the large majority of technical roles are going to shift. And what we can see is that some of the skills and the tasks will evolve. The beautiful thing is when you have that blueprint, it allows you to start to train and prepare your people. And that's the commitment that we're making. And I think Cisco and all of us need to do a better job of helping people get ready for what's coming.
But how much do you need to prepare in budget terms for training as well? Surely some of these people, it's a question of hiring in different skill sets. But if you're going to invest in adapting, that's a commitment financially.
It's so funny because I think in some cases, retraining your people is a lot less expensive than hiring from the outside. And I think it's a bit of a win-win. I think what's so different that we're going to have to figure out how to scale to, both from a budget perspective, but maybe even more so from a time perspective, is that we're not talking about freshen up your skills once a year. What we're talking about
it's not an hour on a PowerPoint learning,
and we're talking about maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly, maybe there's one day a month where we're going to have to all go through training to be able to leverage the technology that's in front of us. And I think it's the mindset shift that's actually going to be bigger than the budget requirements.
I feel like we're hearing that a lot. I mean, we do it sort of as an organization here, that there's, whether it's something going on in markets and so on and so forth. Having said that, then do workers need a college degree?
So this transition, and it's funny because so many of the transitions from a workforce perspective were there already, and the technology is really bringing it to fruition. What we've seen over the last 5 years is that you don't need a college degree the way that you did in the past. I remember a time when at Cisco, if you didn't have a college degree, you couldn't apply for a role. I think Cisco and so many other companies moved away from that when we had a talent shortage, because we realized there's amazing skills that are out there. And if you can invest in training and onboarding talent, you can get to tremendous talent. And so I think that shift has started. I think it's very possible with what we're talking about that you're going to see an emergence of multiple paths for talent. And I think that's great for the US and beyond.
That's something that actually links into why you're here in New York for the Global Citizen event as well, because that's one of the things that Cisco is involved in with that organization, fostering new talent as well. I wonder, in an environment where we're talking about perceptions of where companies are positioning themselves, how important is it for a company like Cisco to be involved in Global Citizen?
I think at this moment, we see a couple of really important trends. And so the first is there's this realization that it's through public-private partnerships, and in many cases, including nonprofits that have incredible capability and scale, that we're having the biggest impact on communities. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I would say is I see both employees and candidates wanting to work for companies that are doing good. And then from a Cisco perspective, because of our technology, because we drive connection, one of the biggest ways that we can impact poverty, as an example, which is where Global Citizen truly focuses, is around education. And so this year, Cisco will have trained 23.5 million students in technology over the last 25 years. And it's a great way for us to really partner with Global Citizen in having this impact around the world. And so I think it's critical. And more I see our corporate partners out there doing a lot of good.
Come back soon, because I feel like there's stuff too when you talk about communities around the world and the education, emerging world. Love to dig even deeper into that. Fran, as always, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Hey, there's even a local New York City landmark. It's got its own 83-foot climbing wall that is among the New York City pricey properties that can be yours. Yours for the right price. As for we mere mortals, we're just excited that rates are coming down for mortgages because mortgage refinancings, we have seen them take up, surging for a second week in a row. So we wanted to talk real estate, specifically what's going on with the high-end New York City residential real estate market. And back with us is Louise Phillips Forbes. She's an agent real estate broker at Brown Harris Stevens back here in our Interactive Brokers studio. How are you?
I am great. Long time no see.
Long time no see. How are things going? How are things changed from we just talked a little while ago?
Like I said when I was here last, fasten your seatbelt. It just took a little bit longer for the feds to respond and be cautious in their dropping in the process that they've given since October of 2023. We have a shift in the buying power of literally $70,000 for an individual today. And that, so what you would have paid in October of 2023, today, it is upwards of $1,100 difference. It's cheaper. You're buying that much more buying power. So it's exciting to watch, and the buyers are out and active.
I'm always curious, as you know, if you're going to buy a home, I wonder how close you really are watching the Fed to say, you know, as soon as the Fed rates are cut, then I'm going to jump into the house. Is there really as quick a function? Are you getting calls after the Jerome Powell speech?
Listen, cash has been king for some time,
right?
But cash can't compete when you have 5 people looking at the same property, whereas it was 2 in a 1 week and we have 20 in a day. I did 26 buyer tours in a 2-week period, my team and myself.
Is that a lot? I don't know, for perspective.
Over 100 appointments of apartments for individual people, and that performed for us. I'm 3 times higher buyer transactions than I am exclusives. That's pretty significant, and that started the conversations that I had talking in the beginning of the year. We had a huge surge unexpectedly in the first quarter because people didn't want to compete with all the buyers that are in the market now. It's already affecting our rental market, and there's an efficiency.
Meaning what? What's going on in the rental market?
When rates go down, so do rents. When rates go up, we sit on the sideline. So that is a cause and effect. And New York, unlike some places in the country, have product to sell. So people are they're figuring out whatever they need to do to purchase a home.
Talk to us about where cash, it feels like there's an awful lot of cash buyers in the city.
Still, yes, absolutely.
What proportion are we looking at?
Last quarter, the first and second quarter, I did about 67% of my transactions were cash. That doesn't mean, and there's also a tax opportunity there. If you're paying cash, then you can pull money out and you write off all of the interest on that. Talk to your accountant. I'm not an accountant, but there's an opportunity.
Don't play one on TV either?
Yep, nope, don't play one on TV. but there's an opportunity that people are taking advantage of that tax credit. And so not that, and today we're seeing people even considering refinancing things I sold less than 24 months ago,
right?
Even 12 months ago. If it's not real property and they don't have a mortgage recording tax, it doesn't cost anything to refinance.
What's the typical property that when you talk about all these showings you've done over the last couple of weeks? Is there an?
Yeah,
I know it runs the gamut.
Yeah,
but
no, it does. We're from 600,000 to 20 million. So,
correct.
So, but these are 5 million down to $1.2 million, and the $1 million to $2 million to $2.5 million. That is a market where people are back in very strongly, and they're being absorbed. Things that have been on the market, in some cases, on and off for 3 years, are now in contract. So it's an efficient market.
What does that mean for repricing? Are people rethinking?
It's, you're going to buy more today than less tomorrow, because as interest rates continue to drop, prices are going to continue to climb.
Remind us too, and I know we always love to talk about the demographic, first-time buyers, second-time buyers, foreign buyers. Who's buying?
The gamut. Let me just say there's a whole tech surge that's been happening here. I spoke about my project at 393 West End Avenue, which is a small boutique 75-unit building.
Right.
1 out of 3 not only purchases but every appointment, which I'm talking hundreds in the last year and a half, are tech individuals. But the first-time buyers are in the market now. Parents are facilitating by supporting their children, co-purchasing. We have empty nesters that
To what sort of percentage?
I mean, listen, we just did 16 transactions in August and part of September, maybe the tail end of July. And I would say that 4 of those, of the 16, were parents co-purchasing with their kids because they don't want to pay rent, and why not build equity in that asset?
So 25%, a quarter of those transactions. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Where's foreign buyers in all this? I know I always like to ask because I'm always curious about money coming in.
Listen, we have a very strong presence of I did 3 transactions with people from Mexico. I've had a big, strong contingency in Asia. But we also have Italian, and look, New York has been on really a discount. It's been for sale and on at very low entry level for us historically, since we've been on the international platform of the market. And so people are parking their money here, and they'll park it everybody wants to buy a piece of the rock. So I find
it's investment.
It's no. Their user, they may be investment temporarily while till their kids go to school here, or they leave. I have a lot of Israeli money coming here. So I think that it's the gamut.
Because of the war?
No, I think it's wanting to buy a piece of what is stable. We are stable. We are, a leader in our economies of all sorts, whether it's real estate, the stock market, or the tech scene.
I want to go back to this idea of all these tech people that are buying as well. I mean, are they typical buyers? Are they people that are buying what everyone in their level wants?
But you have new wealth where you have Gen X individuals that started some .com thing, or maybe that's not even the hip thing now. But some app.
It's probably AI.
AI. Well,
I don't even know if we can say hip thing anymore.
Yeah,
it's just forget it. We're edited constantly.
Exactly. Please edit. But the bottom line is that the amount of job security. I mean, in 2005 when Google started, they committed 500 people here. I don't even know how many there are, but they're
more.
I mean, yes. I mean, and they have helped complement the tri-states on top of the city, and they're not just downtown. As they get older, they want to move to the uptown market where the schools are. So it's a very interesting transition that's metamorphosed through the last 20 years.
Anybody though waiting to say, okay, the Fed's going to cut even more, so I can just hold off a little bit, or they're like, nope, we're going to do it.
It doesn't make sense because it's okay if you can't afford your payment. That's one question. That's one decision.
Right.
But the bottom line is what's price today is going to be higher when the buying power gets stronger
because of the increased demand,
and more people are in the market. Yeah. So there is a concern about bubbles, like immediate bubbles, where where you have a certain niche of a market where there's not enough inventory and there's so many parents trying to support their kids. They'll have 11 offers on an apartment. That's coming across the nation.
Couple questions. How much new inventory is coming in terms of building? Because, obviously there's just New York City is only so big, but that doesn't mean that there isn't new construction still going up or buildings being torn, new stuff coming up. Do people, so what are we seeing in terms of new supply? And I am also curious about, again, the office concern, the excess office that's still in New York City, how that maybe impacts an area.
You would never know that if you're sitting in the Bloomberg building, just to be clear.
No, but there is a fair amount of occupancy. Now, there's been nice pictures put up, but the Container Store went out, Banana Republic went out, Victoria's Secret went out. I mean, there's a whole host of retail that is gone and hasn't been replaced.
I mean, part of that is the pattern that we've been anticipating, the shifting on. I mean, listen, I just ordered a brace for my son's knee. I ordered it last night and it was here today before he left at 4:00 to go back to school. So the access of what we have has changed how the patterns of shopping is done. But from the concern on office is we are going to see people trying to convert office to residential. There are a lot of challenges because they're deep and they need light wells. So the construction costs on that is difficult, and the tax base is going to be higher than your traditional residential market.
So we need to see prices go significantly higher to motivate that. We were talking about the former Goldman building being converted recently as well.
250 West Street. Yeah. Well, that was the Citibank, but they were anticipating that to be very, very challenging. But they made it a lifestyle building because they had the square footage to create 55,000 square feet of amenities. So, I find that those are going to continue to have an attraction, both domestic and international.
What's your favorite kind of property right now to be involved in and represent in terms of selling?
Oh, wow. I mean, I love selling places that I love old architecture, but I find that...
I'm just saying when you're offered up, you're like, got that one. That's going to be an easy one.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I find that if we price, prepare, and present properly, then we can sell anything. It's all about pricing because people want to have a piece of this rock. Yeah. And it's really such a great city that has had a challenging time, that we all have recovery still occurring from the pandemic.
Is there an area, though, within
I am all
Manhattan?
over the city. I would say that there's nothing better than a West Village townhouse, which I did a couple of those this past last quarter, and I've got more coming. Those are amazing because the history that's behind them,
right,
and the stories that can be told about who lived in them.
Who owned them.
I find that to be fascinating. And then I love, my backyard is the Upper West Side, but the East Village also is like, it's unique to me because I live on the Upper West Side. So there's something for everyone, which is what makes Manhattan so special. And there are no boundaries. It's like, you can't go over this street. It's not safe. It's just not the case.
I'm going to ask a really European question. Are people worried about...
Are you shopping for a place in New York City? Do the
wish.
bosses need to know something?
Would you like to co-sponsor?
I can. Louise can.
Call me.
I'm... Climate proofing older properties. This is such a big conversation being had in parts of the world of how much money you need to put into it to make sure that it's more heat efficient, more energy efficient. Are buyers interested in that? Is that a motivating factor?
They would be crazy not to be. Listen, we refinanced my own building where I live from a $2 million mortgage to a $7 million mortgage to do a $4 million improvement, which we did it.
Yeah.
And it's really the local law 11 and 97. All of these are safety opportunities that are going to make the world better and ourselves. But you have to go in with your eyes open and know what you're getting in. And it's up to those brokers to educate themselves.
Is that safety or climate? Just quickly.
Both.
It's both.
Safety. I mean, the elevator laws have changed. How we do local law 11, meaning the point work.
Right.
So bricks don't fall off buildings. All of that. And then the climate comes with what our emissions are and the quality of the energy savings.
We're talking with Louise Phillips Forbes. She's real estate broker at Brown Harris Stevens. We do want to remind everybody we are watching actually a live feed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We are expecting Vice President Kamala Harris to make some comments unveiling her economic plan. That's how it's been played up and promoted, if you will. So as soon as she takes to the podium, we will take you there live to listen to her comments. Meantime, I'm Carol Massar along with Steve and Carroll right here on Bloomberg Businessweek. I love talking with folks like you. You obviously love what you do. You're excited. Real estate, it's like, I read the business pages, but it's my next thing that I always like.
Right.
I love it.
Best cocktail trivia.
I love it. No, it is. It's just everybody wants to talk about it. You've seen different cycles. Are we back to where we were pre-pandemic? Where are we?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there's certain things like, listen, that you read about iconic pieces of property trading for $79 million that didn't even come on the market.
Yeah.
Those are luxury buys that are trophy and to some of the elite that we have. We attract those kinds of owners. And that's a domestic local person who bought that.
Right.
Two, I think that, I think there's still great opportunity and huge growth to come forth. When I was selling real estate, when Bloomberg rezoned 40% of the land mass, the opportunities and the shift in the boundaries of where people would live was amazing.
Right.
And we've got that continuing.
Yeah.
I was
just going to say, wait, didn't this used to be, what was the department store?
Yes, it was.
I can't think of it.
Alexander's.
Alexander's, sorry.
Wow.
It's like an old brand.
Yeah.
That's what, I mean, and then you look at kind of what's here now.
Yep.
Eric, forgive me.
No,
I was trying
please.
to remember.
I mean, this is trivia. I feel like I need to store away and be able to.
You can't go shopping anymore here.
I mean, I could try.
Well, you can.
Yeah.
Will Nails is right there.
Yeah, fair enough.
I wanted to ask about the question around in your conversations with buyers and sellers. Does anyone bring up the election? Is anyone thinking about they're going to hold off?
Well,
or do they want to buy now?
Well, I would say that there has been a little more optimism since there was this shift, and I think that, if you didn't know Kamala, which I didn't, she's held her own in how she speaks, what her principles are. So I think there was a lot of unknown about that, and I think people have embraced it. Secondly, my experience is historically, there's a pause where people are like, let's wait and see what happens.
Are we in that zone now?
But
Is that the time?
No, I mean, you got to remember, we're coming off of 2020, now on top of that, COVID. So they've been waiting a long time.
Yeah.
And interest rates are giving them that motivation that's going to override their life decisions over who's going to be president.
What about, though, Donald Trump coming out, right? He came to Long Island. Like, it was kind of an unusual, campaign stop. I think many billed it as.
Yes, he shut down 495. I was stuck there. I watched a movie with my husband on the street.
Not exactly probably in your plan. But he pledged salt taxes to lift a cap on state and local taxes. And that deduction, means so much to those of us who live in the New York metro area.
Absolutely.
Where there's a lot of taxes and we can't deduct them. And I understand people say you make those choices. That isn't shifting people politically, you think about when they're buying or thinking about that?
I think everybody, if they think about it, who lives in New York, who's in that top, whether it's 2% or 10%, elections financially will sway some. But to me, it's really about what's best for our country.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I went from $90,000 worth of real estate taxes that I wrote off to 10.
Yeah.
Wait, I didn't like that.
90,000 to 10.
I have multiple pieces of property.
Yeah.
So that's $45,000 that I'm paying the government now.
Right.
So I think you have to, it's going to mean more to some than others. I don't live my life through what's in my wallet.
You didn't sell your home. You didn't move to another state.
And I think that your home is a long view.
When things are hot right now, is the sense I'm getting, right? The Fed's cut rates. We're into this cycle. What are you thinking about in 6 months or a year? I mean, does that demand still out there? Do you see that long line out your door?
Absolutely. Look, I think that we have room for a big recovery, and we have room for growth because, as Carroll said, there's only so much real estate and floor to be built or converted or whatever. And so buyers need to have a long view. And I push my buyers today, buy more. I know you really want to only spend this much, but why? You want to have a second child. Reach. This is the time, and refinance again. So that's my advice, is buy long and stay and buy more today than less tomorrow.
Before you go, I want to bring up, there's a story we kind of teed up in the introduction. This was written by our James Tarmy about the New York City townhouse with an 83-foot climbing wall listing for $20 million. It's the Minetta Lane home. It's a local landmark. And as our James Tarmy mentioned, it can now be yours, obviously, if you can afford it. But I do think about old buildings, as you said, with a history, with people who lived in them, or some really cool stuff to it, whether it's a pool, whether it's a climbing wall, what have you. Is there something we've noticed in properties where there's even just more and more being added in terms of amenities?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, the West Village, I just sold a transaction. I did a transaction on Perry Street earlier this year, and that is like Mecca for a location of the West Village, right down the street from Sex and the City townhouse. And it hadn't been on the market for 45 years.
Right.
So they paid $135,000 for it.
Love that.
We had 8 offers in 8 days, and it went $2 million over the asking price. And most of the people that wanted to make those offers wanted to spend $7 million and then flip it for 26.
Unbelievable.
And that would have been possible.
Love that. That's such a great way to wrap up. Louise, as always, so appreciate it. Thank you. Louise Phillips Forbes, real estate broker at Brown Harris Stevens, here in our interactive broker studio, working on properties for Stephen Carroll to come to New York City.
Be able to noose him here.
We might be waiting for a while.
Work out some immigration things or whatever it is. I don't know what his work visa.
I think I'm happy that I'm going before Kamala than after.
There might have been questions. All right, Louise, thank you so much.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Let's bring in Alan Zafran, who's founding partner and co-CEO at IEQ Capital from Foster City, California, as we drive to the close here on Bloomberg Radio. So, Alan, look, yesterday was the 41st record for the S&P 500 this year. We're not going to get 42, it looks like. We're down about 0.25% on the S&P 500. What breaks this bull run? What takes us out of this level that we're seeing so many records for stocks?
Thanks for having me on your show. What takes us out of this market is some unexpected event, because when valuations are this high, you just have less room for error. The reality is, I think the Fed has pretty much articulated the soft landing that few people thought they could. And growth is still there and inflation is moderating. So it's not what you know what you know and you know what you don't know. It's what you don't know that you don't know that's going to hurt you. If things stay as planned, the market is going to slowly continue to work its way up. Most of the valuation increase in multiples has probably been witnessed, but if earnings can continue to grow at a moderate pace, the markets can plod their way higher from here. So the unexpected is what's going to take us down.
Hey, one thing I want to ask you as we continue to monitor Vice President Kamala Harris there in Pittsburgh, trying to get more details of what the specifics are on when it comes to her economic plan. And to be fair, as our Mike Dorning pointed out, we want more specifics when it comes to what a second term of a Trump White House would be. Having said that, you talk with investors, you guys are investing money. Do you often have your clients, institutional or otherwise, saying, hey, I'm a little confused. I want to know what the economic plans are? Or folks just saying, here's what I want to do with my money?
For the most part, we're finding both individual as well as institutional investors are basically focused on economic growth and inflation, because at the end of the day, no matter which administration is in office, let alone which Democrats or Republicans controlling Congress who makes the rules, taxes, inflation, and economic growth are what drive asset values. And so both parties more or less look like we're going to be in an environment where the deficit continues to grow, and where the biggest differences are sector-wise, whether you're going to focus on traditional energy versus electric vehicles and de-electrification is a big issue of change, or perhaps moderate changes with respect to the healthcare system. But for the most part, the administrations aren't that much apart, other than probably potential tax changes from the TCJA that were imposed during the Trump administration. So we see handfuls of clients that take a let's wait and see what happens with the US presidential election outcome. The reality is the markets move in the end on economic growth, not on who's in the office as a president.
And look, the economic picture pretty solid by all accounts. The OECD forecast out today saying US GDP rising 2.6% this year, 1.6% next year though. Where are you on your outlook on a soft landing and your concerns about where growth is going from here?
I think the soft landing has actually been achieved, and you're seeing things like rates have come down now on the long end of the curve, and you're seeing actually refinancing applications have spiked. They've had more. The index on mortgage refinancings is the highest point it's been since April of 2022. So you can begin to see the fact of slower rates rekindling economic growth. Where we come out is you're going to be in a GDP growth environment of 2 to 3%. You are going to be in a higher inflationary environment, closer to 3% per annum than what it was prior to COVID. So what COVID and its saving COVID by printing trillions of dollars has created a higher inflationary environment going forward. And so that ultimately means you probably have moderately higher yields. And that in turn tells you that there's probably less room from here at 20 times forward earnings for the S&P to expand its PE multiple, and therefore market growth, public equity market growth from here is more dependent on earnings growth than on PE multiple expansion. Hence, to answer my first question, there's less room for error because the likelihood of exceptional additional multiple expansion from here is pretty limited.
All right. Sounds like you're also then starting to think about earnings. Is that kind of your next focal point? Just got about 30 seconds here, Alan, real quickly.
Yes, we need to see earnings growth to merit the relatively high multiples that investors continue to pay on the markets. And so if you think the market is trading a little, S&P 500 trading at a little over 20 times forward earnings is fully valued, then your expectation, if the multiple holds, is the market grows at the rate of earnings growth, that might be something in the order of 6 to 8% for the next couple of years.
All right.
Not terrible, better than bonds, but not extraordinary.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's a little perspective there. Alan, thank you so much. As always, appreciate you jumping around as we had watching the vice president in Pittsburgh and just some things going on here, keeping us busy on this Wednesday. Alan Zafran, founding partner, co-CEO at IEQ Capital out there on the West Coast.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.